You are listening to Seeking the Hidden Thing with Kryptos. Greetings, everyone, to another episode of Seeking the Hidden Thing. It is my pleasure to have Josh Abbotoy, Chase Davis, and William Wolfe here together to talk about the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm not Southern Baptist. I'm from a Dutch Reformed tradition, a smallish denomination, and we have our own ways. But it's really been since getting online that I have learned the importance of and just the size of the Southern Baptist Convention. It's like 40 times the size of my own denomination. And there's a big Venn diagram between people who are members of the Southern Baptist Convention and who are involved in the highest level of politics in the United States. And so the things that are happening at the Southern Baptist Convention are becoming increasingly bellwethers and indicators of what may or may not be happening in the broader American political sphere. I probably should have done this last year already, but it just occurred to me, why not bring you guys on and get a preview episode for those that maybe don't know anything and don't know enough about the Southern Baptist Convention of, sort of what it is, why it matters, and then what are the big issues today. So William was suggesting, Josh, that, again, welcome, gentlemen. And William was suggesting, Josh, that you might be a good one for just maybe encapsulating sort of like, what is the SBC and in a sense, why does it matter?
Yeah, totally. The SBC was founded back in 1845. Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, our flagship seminary, was founded by folks who moved from Princeton Theological Seminary down to Louisville, Kentucky, again in the mid-1800s, and founded our flagship theological center for education. And really what's happened over the course of the last 200 years now is the SBC has remained the one large, what you could call mainline denomination in American Protestantism that has not fallen to theological liberalism. And just to give a basic sense of the scale, there's approximately 14 million Southern Baptists. They are geographically located primarily in the Southeast and Texas, with a smattering elsewhere. But in the South and the Southeast, you really feel the presence of the SBC. They feel like a main line. Just like in the North, you might have a Congregationalist or UCC church. In the South, on your main street, on the squares of the little towns all over the South, you have First Baptist, and First Baptist is probably Southern Baptist. And in the South and the Southeast, the SBC retains what you could call mainline social functions. It's the in addition to being a place where the gospel is preached and people worship on Sunday mornings, it tends to be a hub where a lot of the leading members of communities attend. There's a lot of towns where if you hope to become mayor, you'd better be a member at First Baptist. Ideally, you'd be a deacon at First Baptist. And so it's got this, even to this day, it retains this mainline social function in the areas where it dominates that is increasingly rare in modern America. And so this is why it matters. Of course, electorally, it matters. It's despite being 14 million people, there's another 30 million evangelicals who in various ways are looking to the SBC for cultural guidance. They don't have the denominational organization, but theologically and culturally, they align well with the general Southern Baptist outlook. So it and its institutions have become the de facto leaders of American evangelicalism. And therefore it matters tremendously in political engagement. And this is why, in some ways, I think it's become a very important strategic target for the left and for influences on, its seminaries and the places where it produces pastors who go out and pastor flocks all across the country. And just a quick point on this, just to underscore the point, but Southern Baptist seminaries train approximately 30% of the new pastors, any denomination, any Christian denomination in the country. So again, it's an influence on Protestantism in America that matters tremendously.
Yeah, and that's been kind of my sense of it. It was, I knew of the Southern Baptist Convention and knew it was big, but just it was until really meeting you guys that it never really struck me the scope of it. I come from basically an ethnic minority church, right? So you always sort of think of yourself as a small group in town. You're the Dutch church, and you're always a little bit outside of the mainstream. But the Southern Baptist Convention and Southern Baptists in general are, as you say, really part of sort of mainstream American culture, especially in the South. Now, Chase, your church, I did not know this, but your church recently came into the Southern Baptist into the Southern Baptist Convention. What led that decision? What drove that decision for you and your congregation?
Well, I grew up Southern Baptist, and so I was saved under the ministry of Pastor Jack Graham at Prestonwood Baptist Church. He's been very vocal and consistent, kind of a conservative, stalwart leader. He was a president of the Southern Baptist Convention at one point and continued in Southern Baptist Church in college, Pastor Butch Smith down in College Station, Texas. And so I'd always been familiar with Southern Baptist life. When we started our church in Boulder, we were affiliated with a network. And that time with that network came to an end, and our church was looking for broader affiliations. We think it's important for churches to have some kind of collegial, ecclesial affiliation, so there can be kind of mutual encouragement, prayer, support, partnership. The Southern Baptist Convention was kind of a no-brainer for us in terms of resources, and we also were very inspired by faithful pastors, whether it is a pastor like Jack Graham or many others, like what William is doing with the Center for Baptist Leadership. We think the Southern Baptist Convention, as the Southern Baptist Convention goes, so goes kind of the state of Christianity, Protestant Christianity in America, and that's a very exciting, aspect of it to us. So we already had a lot of good friends in the denomination, and I've never been to a convention. This will be my first one coming up. I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun, and I'm excited to speak at the Center for Baptist Leadership and just to connect with a lot of old friends. I have a lot of friends in the denomination who I'll get to partner with. And really, in a former network, I was battling a lot of kind of the woke ideology, feminism, and I saw that happening in a denomination that I grew up in. And I was, our church and myself, I just took stock of what I had available, what we could offer. And if all we could offer were a couple messengers and being part of something and writing some articles, then I'm happy to play a part in that, because I would hate to see the Southern Baptist Convention kind of either go belly up or be compromised on really crucial matters as we represent the faith in America.
And it is really interesting how it does, membership does plug you into a very real network. I've talked about this in the past in terms of say the way social media works for the left, in that the things like Twitter and so forth allowed the left wing in America to network, sort of to put their networking on steroids, because these are folks that are all meeting at elite schools, elite institutions, think tanks. They're all out working in universities and other places, but this instant kind of connection. And this immediately made me think of, one of the other places that these types of networks exist is in churches. And then once you begin to realize that there's a network of the scale of the Southern Baptist Convention, that when you begin to amplify it with things like social media, the main actors and players in the Southern Baptist Convention using the accelerating power of something like social media can really begin to wield an extraordinary amount of influence in a very, very short time. And I think we've seen that, beginning with COVID even and ramping up in the last few years, just the prominent place that social media has allowed, or the prominent place the Southern Baptist Church in general has begun to play in American politics. And for yourself, you begin to see church organizations like yours, William, the Center for Baptist Leadership, beginning to become, not insignificant political players in a larger scene, which has got to be kind of interesting for you, because in many ways this is a ministry. So maybe explain a little bit to people kind of what you do at the Center for Baptist Leadership.
Yeah, well, it definitely is a ministry. That's certainly how we view it. It's a ministry for Southern Baptist churches, and in many ways it's a ministry, for America as well. And, really over the last few decades in particular, I think that Southern Baptists have abandoned civic responsibilities that they have to their fellow American citizens. We're great at taking the gospel around the world, and we should do that. I mean, fundamentally, that's why the Southern Baptist Convention exists, is because cooperating individual autonomous Congregationalist Baptist churches decided that they could do more together than they could do apart. That's our fundamental thesis. And so that's a wonderful thing that we do, that we pool money for international missions, for theological education, and for church planting. Southern Baptists are also American citizens. We have responsibilities and things that we owe our neighbors. And so at the Center for Baptist Leadership, we're trying to do two main things. We're trying to revitalize the Southern Baptist Convention so that it is theologically sound and essentially on mission. That's a word that we like to use for the 21st century and all the things we're doing for the churches. And this is really important because creeping liberalism, never stops creeping. Every generation has to fight for faithfulness, and every generation has a new battle. I've thought about this quite a bit recently, and I'll put it like this. About 50 years ago, as all the mainline Protestant denominations were being taken over by theological liberalism, even longer than 40 years ago. Think about Machen, right? And Christianity and liberalism, the fight he fought in the PCUSA. And as we saw the Ivy Leagues go, liberal, and the seminaries go liberal, the battle there was fundamentally won against people who were trying to subtract from God's word. Theological liberalism was saying, you can't trust this. We don't know if the book of Jonah actually happened. We don't know if these miracles happened. They were subtracting from the fidelity of God's word. What we're dealing with now, and that was fought. They fought that and they beat it. And they said, no, Southern Baptists are going to stand on all of Scripture. We're going to defend the inerrancy and the sufficiency of Scripture in our denomination against theological liberalism and progressive social activism. What we've had the last decade or so, maybe even more, is an addition to God's word that is equally compromising. There are people who are on paper who say they are inerrantists, that they believe in all of Scripture, and they are not questioning the validity of that, the truthfulness of the resurrection. But then they're adding on top of it social justice activism, climate change activism, compromise with the LGBT, compromise on immigration issues. And they're saying to be a Christian means, yeah, we agree on inerrancy and orthodoxy, but then you have to do all these other social justice programs as well. Ultimately, that subverts the gospel in just a different way. So we're fighting that fight in the Southern Baptist Convention to just stand on God's word and apply it rightly. And then at the same time, we're working to equip Southern Baptist pastors and lay members to be, bold Baptist witnesses in the public square. Baptists with backbone is what I like to call them, right? We, people who aren't looking for the approval of the elites, people who don't want op-eds in the Washington Post unless they get spread their message. I mean, if the Washington Post wants to let me write an op-ed saying Christians should support mass deportations, I'll write that op-ed. It might be the last one that I write. But these guys wanted approval from the secular world. They fell in with all of the major social fads, racial justice, Me Too, TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, and it neutered Southern Baptists in the public square. Organizations like the After Party then came along to create Sunday school curriculum to make sure that we were neither right nor left, which means wink, wink, nod, nod, we're left, right? So we're trying to counter that and equip Southern Baptists to fight for the future of America as well as fighting for the future of the church.
It's interesting that you say this, because I do regular devotions where I read, fairly, 3 to 5 chapters a day, depending on the length of the chapters. And one of the things you notice in the Scriptures, and this is like while the apostles are still alive, while the Scriptures are actually being written, that in many ways, the conflicts that the apostles got themselves into were already in that time battling those that would corrupt the faith, who would grift off the faith, who would subvert the faith. And you realize that like these are not new problems for us as Christians. And in many ways, you know, it's almost like, you know, you hate to think, but like the Jordan Peterson thing of you know, you got to clean up your room, right? And there is a certain sense, I think, where in the church, there is a real need for us to clean up our room. Yeah. It was interesting, like to see the work though, too, because I know recently you were supporting Chase. Like Chase was involved in, I forget exactly but there was some sort of legislation that was coming up in your community, Chase, that the Center for Baptist Leadership was able to sort of go out and lend support for that.
Yeah, it was great. There was a radical transgender bill that passed, but some of the most egregious things were gutted. They were trying to strip custody rights from parents who wouldn't affirm their child's perceived gender. They kept in criminal or I guess civil penalties for people who participate in quote unquote dead naming, quote unquote misgendering, in any place of public accommodation. So any business owner or anyone, it's very vague in how it will be enforced. They're basically trying to make everyone in Colorado Jack Phillips who doesn't abide by transgender ideology. So we raised the flag at Fight 1312, which was a coalition, a very loose coalition that we formed among pastors. And William saw that and took it upon himself to come out here and help us and provide some insight into how these things work. I'd never spoken at a rally, you know, political rally. I've only preached. And so,
as a pastor, you haven't spoken at a political rally, eh?
No, many haven't. And so we don't get that in training in seminaries, how to speak at a political rally. But William has had great insights and he spoke, and it's great to have a partner like him who will support us. And he's really showing, you know, the mission of Center for Baptist Leadership to be a better Baptist voice. Like he's putting his money where his mouth is by coming out here on his own dime to take care of business with us and have our back. Whereas kind of legacy institutions in the Southern Baptist Commission, what are they going to do? They publish a letter publicly, you know, and it's tepid at best, not calling wickedness, evil, and demonic forces demonic. It's just kind of like, we're disappointed, you know, and it's like very, very feminine coded, very disappointed. But William's out there with us getting sunburned in the hot Colorado sun at the Capitol. So it was very great to have him out.
Yeah, if I could speak to that a little bit more, like it really kind of gets into our vision here. And like we're doing it in fits and starts. And I've got, you know, man, I have ideas in my head about what we could do for trainings and churches and curriculum that I think just could change the country and change the church. A lot of those take time, money, and resources, right? But, you know, with what we have built so far is we have a website, we have a platform, we can publish articles and do podcasts, we can do live streams. I, by God's grace, have built a decent, you know, X following that I want to leverage for this stuff. And so when I see Chase and his buddy step up to this fight, you know, I don't have to have like some long drawn out conversation with people about whether we're going to support him or not. We're nimble. We can pivot. I'm like, yes, I'm in. Let me help. Chase, write something. We'll publish it. Come on a live stream. Let's talk about it. And then, you know, through that, you know, being sort of one of the first people to do it, it helps elevate the issue, and voices like Chase's, then that gets more, you know, national media attention. I mean, I have some pretty major conservative, you know, media folks who follow me, and Chase does too. And these guys do too. So I'm not trying to take all the credit in any way, shape, or form. I'm just trying to say, here's an accelerant. So we published multiple articles, did multiple live streams, you know, kind of helped draw national attention to it, really support them, and then equip them. I mean, I do have political training. I know what it looks like to like run a congressional hearing, you know, and that's some of the things we want to provide too with Center for Baptist Leadership is could build a curriculum to make your pastor sort of a civic leader and activist, so to speak. Like give them training on how to respond to the media, give them training on how to testify at a hearing, give them training on how to, you know, coordinate a highly engaged and influential group of committed activists to move the needle. Just make them comfortable talking to people. You know, it's like, hey, you can email your member of Congress, you can email your senator, and even more so, you can and you should tell them I'm a pastor with X number of people at my church, and I talk to all these other churches. And let me tell you, if you guys mess this up, we're coming for you. Like, I mean, the church has been so scared to do things like that, to throw their weight around and say, hey, there's hundreds of thousands of Christians in Colorado, and if we get involved, we might be able to put you out of office, because every other nasty political group out there, and even the good ones too, are doing that, right? All the gays are doing that. They're saying, like, if you don't support us, we'll vote you out of office. Why is it that the Human Rights Campaign, one of the most, lecherous groups in American life, has companies scared of their scorecard, when Southern Baptists at 13 million strong, nobody cares about insulting them? I mean, we really should change that dynamic, and we can.
Well, and it's interesting you talk about like local pastors, because it's, like in Canada, it's kind of bizarre because, active conservative Christians make up maybe 5% of the population, and there's very few. I mean, out in the country, you do get towns where, you can approach a majority of the people who are, Christian or church adjacent. But I mean, you have towns where like 70, 80% of the people are church going and fairly devout. And, there's no reason why your town can't be quote unquote Christian. Like why should it be sort of, politically neutral? Why can't you put the flag in the ground and say, Podunk, Alabama, we've got 4 Baptist churches here and like 1,500 people. This is a Christian town, and I could imagine that if you begin to leverage that and you get multiple towns and multiple places just putting a flag in the ground and saying, this is a Christian place, that it begins to get to the point where it's not an insignificant political presence. And you don't even have to be, overly quote unquote political. Like, you can still be very gospel minded and so forth, but you can just say, like, us and our friends, this is our town and this is how we choose to live our life and express ourselves politically. We're still going to make sure the trash gets picked up and the potholes get filled, but it's being done in a Christian manner.
Well, I have no opposition to that, and let other guys weigh in. But one of the sad realities here in America is that if conservative Christians tried to do that in a small town, some of the most opposition they might face would come from Baptist churches. That is until we reach them and re-educate them.
That is true and has been true in the past, because this, I know, is getting online. This is one of the things that even I as an anon and so forth have encountered when you talk about being politically active. It's just, well, that's just unchristian, and you're like, we don't do that, and you're like. And so you realize just how far we have to come to say, like, no, there is, yes, politics is dangerous. The power does corrupt. We recognize all these things, but having a moral grounding, having a spiritual grounding, this gives us something that other political actors don't do, is in the sense that we know right from wrong. And when we have to make hard decisions, we come at it from we're not just basically in a real politic thing. We just don't immediately default to like millions must die. We recognize that there's a moral framework within which even Christians have to take difficult political actions, but we do that out of our own situation. And if you don't bring that into the public sphere, then you're basically robbing your society of a morally upright, grounded, faithful Christian presence in the community. You live 80% of the people in town, and you're basically ceding it to the 20% who are godless. And you're like, why should that be?
Yeah, and I was just going to elaborate as well, that the what you're describing, this confident Christian witness in the public square, it is the functional reality in much of the Bible Belt in America today, but it is that way sort of despite senior SBC leadership, not sort of encouraged by SBC leadership. And, so much of our best thinking within American evangelicalism for the last 30 years has really gone to how can we make ourselves like politically non-threatening, such that we can navigate in very hostile environments like Manhattan and these sorts of scenarios. And that I would say that perhaps the tail has wagged the dog, where some of the missional strategy for deep blue areas that maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. Chase may have views on that, but it was conventional wisdom for how the church needed to expand into deeply progressive post-Christian parts of this country. And it's ended up sort of wagging the dog in the sense that evangelicals have broadly depoliticized. And so the very best that you'll see are the ones who are the least connected to national evangelicalism. It's these sort of residual pockets of virtue in the Bible Belt where people just have the right instincts and speak confidently in the public square. But more broadly, Chase notwithstanding, many of our generation have really adopted much more of a very soft-spoken, depoliticized model with our public engagement.
Yeah, and in a sense, it's the difference between sort of the people who are unself-consciously and openly and outwardly Christian in their town, and as you say, those who are quietist and now have to who now have to be in a posture where they have to, in a sense, self-consciously assert themselves as Christians and flex those muscles that they haven't in maybe 3-4 generations now. And so this is the part of this whole kind of emergent, I think, tension within the SBC, and I think a lot of this changes have really been in the last 3-4, like since 2000. You've seen a tremendous amount of change. At least I've seen that. Maybe just being more aware of it, but maybe correct me if I'm wrong. But it does seem like there is now, especially post COVID, a much more robust political attitude coming out of the SBC.
I would sort of maybe quibble with that just a tad bit, and here's why.
Sure.
The robust, this is always very interesting to note. The robust political advocacy that we've seen from any of sort of the convention leaders or the elites in the Southern Baptist Convention apparatus has been towards the regime-approved issues, right? So when Michael Brown was shot in Ferguson, Missouri, because he assaulted a cop after robbing a store, and then this fake narrative of hands up, don't shoot really ignited. I mean, Black Lives Matter was kind of, I think, already going on, but that's what, made it a national conversation. Our Southern Baptist Convention leaders did not hesitate to be politically active, denouncing the systemic lingering racism of American society. People like Trevin Wax, who's a major figure, younger figure leader in the SBC and NAM and Lifeway and places like that. He was like, well, I had thought, we had moved past this, but clearly it was just a Band-Aid on a festering wound in American life. So they don't hesitate to run to the mic to parrot, regime approved political narratives. They didn't hesitate to run to the mic to denounce President Trump and be never Trumpers in 2016. A Southern Baptist Convention pastor who I went to church with at the time, this guy Thabiti Anawible, used his blog at the Gospel Coalition to let a guest blogger publish an article saying pastors tell us to vote for Clinton. So clearly, they were not shy about being politically active towards the left, but yes, they were shy, and I'd say even embarrassed about being politically active on the right. Then we got COVID and Love Your Neighbor and Get the Shot, and then the Summer of Love and George Floyd and, all of that. Then we started getting, I think, a backlash where conservative Southern Baptist pastors were like, wait a minute, you guys can be so socially active and politically active on these regime-approved issues and narratives, but if I want to tell my congregants that I think it's okay to vote for Donald Trump, I can't do that. No, I'm going to do that. And then the assassination attempt on Trump, I think, really kind of finally flipped the switch for a lot of people. I think we saw more outspoken conservative or America First political advocacy from Southern Baptists. Megan Basham's book played into that a lot. So I think the pendulum is swinging. And as we're shifting away from aggressive political activism from our elites towards socially left issues, we're getting more sort of, hey, I'm going to speak out on behalf of America on being pro, immigration enforcement and deportations, on being pro Christianity in the public square. And we want to shepherd and guide that movement. With its pros and cons, not everything's perfect, right? We don't want to just be MAGA cheerleaders. But President Trump is doing a good job. I think he deserves our support, and more people are willing to say that now than ever before.
And I've got this is a fascinating topic to me, so I got to jump in here too. But I do think that the SBC has gotten, there's been ups and downs with respect to its the partisan nature of the SBC's engagement, right? So, 20 years ago, when Karl Rove helped to architect W's massive 2004 electoral victory. That was in some ways, you could say, maybe the high watermark of SBC political influence, in the sense that, you know, the SBC was an ascendant, rapidly growing denomination at the time, turned out very heavily for W. We had leaders who were very plugged in with the Bush administration, and all of this. But I think that some of those prior generations, we are here in part because some of those prior generations were perceived as being too cozy with the GOP qua political party. In other words, you know, they were certainly turning out the vote for the GOP, but after Obama won resoundingly and people evaluated the record, I think there was some merit to a concern that we were not getting enough in the transaction, that we were delivering votes, but, you know, we weren't really getting wins from the GOP establishment for the votes that we delivered. And so I do see signs for hope right now, because there's just a savvier, you know, younger generation getting involved that understands that politics is transactional. And yes, the SBC has to work transactionally with the GOP. That's the obvious choice. It's the only real choice. But it's a transaction, and we need to be getting something out of it. We need to be advancing Southern Baptist interests. And, you know, I think that partly with this younger generation, I think there's a growing recognition from a lot of faithful lay people that we need to rally around those institutions of civic society that are, you know, remotely sympathetic to the values and commitments that we hold dear. And, you know, that's a relatively short list, and the SBC has to be at the top of it. This is an institution that matters in American life, and it really should be a faithful advocate for a lot of our very basic commitments, like traditional family, you know, right to life, these very basic issues, national integrity and sovereignty, those sorts of things.
Yeah, if I can jump in there real quick, because I'm a testimony to what Josh is talking about. Growing up at Prestonwood, I love Pastor Jack Graham, but as a millennial, kind of jaded and cynical, it did come across as partisan. I don't think Jack's partisan, but there was confusion, you know, back in 2000, early 2000s, growing up in that kind of like Southern Baptist life. And what I've come to appreciate is exactly what Josh is talking about and William is doing, is the need for the church to be involved in civic life. And I think there's a huge opportunity. I'm highly sympathetic to pastors who feel like they're kind of handcuffed by these elites in the Southern Baptist Convention, whether it's NAM or the ERLC or anything else, who are so hypocritical and brazenly so. And yet these pastors voted for Donald Trump, but they've been told that missionally or whatever, they can't vocalize that, they can't talk about it. I feel a great deal of sympathy for them, because I want pastors to be free to honor God in the public square. And yet oftentimes they're told, whether they live in a blue or any area, that they should never talk about these things. That's really shameful that they've been led to such a place. And it makes me sad for them. And so I think there's a lot, not only just organizationally, that we have an opportunity to help educate, help equip, but also institutionally, we need to kind of severely push back and punish those who have led pastors to such a plight, you know, where they personally are going to vote for Trump or these causes that are good and map up with reality in the Bible, and yet they don't feel able to equip their church for whatever reason. I want to help them as much as I can. We're trying to do that in Colorado just by having conversations with pastors. Sometimes we do that through meme warfare. Sometimes we call out hypocrisy, but a lot of times just conversations, people like, you voted for Trump, right? And then we can start to have a dialogue about how they're helping their congregation, not just vote for Trump, not support the GOP, but think about politics in a much more traditional classical sense than they've been taught in many of the kind of main institutions they were trained in.
Well, it's kind of thing like what Josh was saying, is that, like, think about what you guys want to get out of the bargain. Like, you're bringing a vote, you're bringing something, you know, and elite theory says, right, you know, the organized few always win out over the disorganized many, right? And so there's, in a sense, so if you as the organized few have an agenda, what is it that you want to get out of this bargain? And that's, I think, a question that a lot of Christians need to ask, and that more in the Southern Baptists are beginning to ask this question, I think, is an important cultural moment, and in the in where things are heading in the United States.
Yeah, one example of that would be it's clear that some of the SBC elites, who I would argue in many ways are failures, are recognizing some of the significant shifts in our culture. And one of those would be the issues with public education, right? I think for many decades, particularly in the South, not New York, not California, not Washington State, Southern Baptists might have just thought, I could put my kids in public school. It's no problem. We've got a strong church community. But public schools, even in deep red counties, have, pornographic and other ridiculous, obscene materials being foisted upon the kids. And so we're seeing this idea that, okay, we need to invest more in Christian education. And so, this is something we've argued for, like, what would it look like for the Southern Baptist Convention to sort of lead with Lifeway, our publishing house, on producing solid theological, based patriotic, Christian education curriculum for homeschoolers or co-ops, or for Southern Baptist churches to start Christian schools. Well, some of our elites have picked up on that, and some have started publishing little books about, getting churches to start Christian schools. And that's great. But the problem is, we wonder, have they really understood what's happening here? Are they just sort of capitalizing on a fad? And will they do sort of the right thing, but in a weakened fashion? So, we want to be there to help equip Southern Baptists to do these things, like start Christian schools, get your kids out of public schools, which will have a major impact on the next generation, but in a serious fashion.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that, because Christian education is such a big part of my own denomination, and not sending your kids to Christian school, it in many congregations might be a thing that would prevent you, say, from becoming an elder. Like these types of things. So it's interesting. Yeah. And you're right. And these are the kind of questions you ask for. But I guess, the Southern Baptist Convention is starting on the 8th, going through to the 11th. It works very differently from, I know, my own denomination, where we have a set number of classes or presbyteries, if you come from the Presbyterian Church, and each local governing body sends, one pastor, one elder, and then alternates. And so it limits the number of people, but yours is based on like the numbers of attendees can vary quite widely in terms of who can attend and show up. It just, that part of it was very fascinating to me.
Yeah, that's right. I'll take that one. Sorry to monopolize the conversation, guys.
No,
anyone else can jump in, but the way it works, Baptists are congregational people, and in principle, the principles of congregationalism in a local church apply to how we function as a convention overall. And so we have a formula that allows all of our churches to send messengers. That's what we call them, messengers, to the Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting, who are then able to vote on, major issues, helping elect new trustees, vote on amendments to our Constitution, vote on the resolutions that we propose each year. And it ranges from a minimum of 2 to a maximum of 12. No church can send more than 12 messengers. Nobody sends less than 2. If you're in and you've given something, you should get to send your 2. If you're a multi-site, multi-service mega church, you still only get to send a maximum of 12. So that's a sort of an effort to secure parity amongst the representation and interests of these different sort of church sizes and visions in the Southern Baptist Convention. And yeah, there's no upward limit on the number of total messengers that could show up at a Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting. We're meeting in Dallas this year. 40 years ago in Dallas in 1985, it was the height of the conservative resurgence, when the grassroots conservative Southern Baptists were taking the convention back from the theological liberals. We had 50,000 Southern Baptists show up to Dallas to take votes on electing new presidents. And really, that process had been going since 1978, 79, when sort of this conservative reformer Adrian Rogers was elected, but the liberals kind of kept fighting back year over year. And we're getting to the point where the new conservative appointees were changing boards. And so 85 was like a watershed. It was like the liberals' last stand. So a lot of liberals came, a lot of conservatives came. W.A. Criswell preached his now famous sermon, Whether We Live or Die. And let me just commend that to all your listeners on this podcast, many of whom I assume are not Southern Baptists, but deal with these institutional issues in their denominations. Criswell laid out in this sermon, Whether We Live or Die, what he called, a pattern of death in the life of an individual pastor or preacher, a pattern of death in an institution, and a pattern of death in a denomination. And at the root of each one of those, patterns of death was abandoning the word of God. And then he gave sort of a vision for renewal. It's a powerful sermon. It's worth listening to. And that really turned the tide in the Southern Baptist Convention. We're not going to have 50,000 people there in Dallas this year for the 40th anniversary of Criswell's sermon, Whether We Live or Die. Maybe we'll have about 10,000. 10 to 12,000. That's actually one of the issues I would argue in Southern Baptist Convention life that we want to change, is that the average Southern Baptist church has about 100 members or less. That's the average. 70% or more Southern Baptist churches, 100 members or less. They often have a hard time budgeting and planning to send their voters to the annual meeting. And so really then those 30% of the larger churches, or even the 5 to 10% of the mega churches, they're sending their 12. But even some of these other churches, because of the formula allotments, they could send 5, 6, 7, 8. They maybe only send 1 or only send 2. And so we have this sort of lopsided direction the Southern Baptist Convention is being taken, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The mega churches dominate the direction of the convention, and those mega churches are usually a little more liberal, a little more Tim Keller-esque, and your mom and pop, country Southern Baptist church isn't being represented. So one of the things we want to do is find those churches and just impress upon them the importance of re-engaging. This is one of the only denominations in the world where the laity actually have a mechanism by which they can change the direction. One of the reasons the Presbyterian Church USA went liberal and led to the split and the development of the PCA is that the laity had no ability to counter the liberalization of the leaders because they couldn't come and vote. We are unique. It's a unique stewardship for Southern Baptists, and we need more churches to get involved and show up. So we'll have 10,000 in Dallas. I hope to see conventions here in the future where we have 15,000, 20,000, because if the numbers are higher, more conservatives are voting.
That's good. So like I said, I know this is probably going to end up giving you a spot unless somebody else wants to take the lead of it first. Is what are the major issues this year that are in front of the Southern Baptist Convention?
Josh, you can take some of them.
Yeah, I can speak to that briefly. I think the biggest issue is one that we've been arguing about for several years now. It's called the Law Amendment. You've probably seen some internet dialogue about this, but our confession says that the office of pastor in a Southern Baptist church should be reserved for only qualified men, as set forth in Scripture. And we're not a Presbyterian structure. We don't do ordination examinations or anything like that. As a convention, our one enforcement mechanism is to say, hey, church, you do X, Y, or Z that's not in accord with our confession, so you can no longer be a member of the convention. So removal of a congregation is our only enforcement mechanism. And frankly, that has not been working. We have not been removing churches as a general practice that have women pastors. And this procedural posture allows a lot of our leaders to say, oh no, we do hold to Scripture on paper. We do hold to our confession, but we have discretion in the enforcement. We're trying to bring these churches along, rather than sort of drop the hammer on them. This has been a big debate in Baptist life for years now. And it looks like, we've already got through one cycle of trying to approve this law amendment that essentially removes discretion on the enforcement of our confession on this point. It's a move that needs to pass 2 consecutive years of 2/3 votes at the conventions in order for it to take effect. So we actually won the vote in New Orleans in 23. We lost the vote in Indianapolis just by a hair. We got like 63% and we needed 66. And it's going to come back in Dallas. There's been more issues, more questions raised. We hope that it's very likely to pass in Dallas. That's issue number one. Issue number two just revolves around transparency, what you could call that broadly. But there have been for years now significant questions about the financial management of a number of the large Southern Baptist entities. Keep in mind, some of these are managing hundreds of millions of dollars, and they are doing so with almost no financial disclosure, far less than what would be standard for a normal nonprofit. What's normal for American Reformer, the nonprofit that I run. We file a 990 every year. Southern Baptist entities don't do that. They don't report their financial condition to the messengers, and that makes accountability very difficult. So there's a number of different efforts that are pushing for increased transparency in Dallas. William, maybe you want to hop in on ERLC. I've talked about a couple of the key issues, but
yeah, I mean, so we're trying to stop Lady Pastrix from turning Southern Baptist into the United Methodists. We're trying to doge the SBC, get more financial accountability and insight into how our tithe dollars are being spent. I mean, this is crazy, but it is true. Planned Parenthood is more financially transparent than any Southern Baptist Convention entity because Planned Parenthood files a 990 with the federal government that shows top compensation for their executives, conflicts of interests, expenditures, outstanding sort of holdings outside of sort of like what's in your bank accounts, like land holdings, things like that, which is actually an issue with the North American Mission Board. We're not asking Southern Baptists to file that with the federal government. We're asking our entities to provide a similar level of disclosure to our local churches. And this is because trust is down. There's been a lot of financial mismanagement. As one pastor recently on the CBL podcast said, Lewis Richardson, he said, if it wouldn't work in a local church, it ought not to work in the Southern Baptist Convention. And so basically we're asking for, financial transparency akin to what you would do in a church with your givers applied to our convention level. The last big one is dealing with rogue entities in Southern Baptist Convention life. The most significant one being the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. It's our official public policy arm, formerly run by Russell Moore. The ERLC, currently run by Brent Leatherwood. And you know what? It's been 4 years since Russell Moore left, and there has been no substantial change. The mission is the same. Their management arguably is even worse. They can't get good staff. They don't represent us well in the public square. And Brent Leatherwood has really used it as a platform to push his own personal agenda and not issues that Southern Baptists are united on. Last year, the convention, we took a vote on abolishing that entity, which is something we can do. We can get rid of these entities if we want to, according to our bylaws. And that vote got, I'd say, about 40% of support in the room. So almost half of Southern Baptists said, you are so divisive and problematic, we don't even want you around anymore. What have they done the last year in response to that? Absolutely nothing to address the real issues. Brent actually was fired and then rehired last July in a very embarrassing incident. Wow. And then they've launched this massive PR campaign, essentially taking high school tours of Washington, D.C. and posting pictures with the Capitol building and a few members of Congress that they can get access with, which is not a hard thing to do. It doesn't mean they're advancing our interests, and trying to say nothing to see here. So I hope Baptists know better than to buy that narrative. And fundamentally what we want is we want an Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission that represents us effectively and powerfully in the public square. And we think the way to get that is to get new leadership, get a new board, and to force that, we have to take another vote to get rid of them. Chase might want to speak to that too.
Yeah, they're terrible. I mean, there's kind of there's still a lingering naivete about trusting organizations like the RLC, NAM, the IMB. And it's sad to me. I think of my wife's grandmother, Meemaw, who's a faithful member of a Southern Baptist church. She tithes. She's been a member there. Her late husband was a deacon there for many, many years. And this is money going to the convention that her church is giving. And this IMB, for example, I mean, that's not one that we mentioned yet, recalled missionaries from the mission field who wouldn't get the shot. And that's just emblematic of the corruption. But Russell Moore is a snake, and
he has very deep influence with a lot of people, still. And he raised up Leatherwood, who supported something like red flag laws in Tennessee, which is totally contradictory to not only the American way of life, but to kind of Southern Baptists in general. And now they're going around doing basically like school trips to DC, trying to, show how they have influence and power, which they don't. No one respects them there. And so it needs to be gotten rid of. It'd be great to have an entity that, like Center for Baptist Leadership, can come out and support local fights, because there are a lot of local fights. There are a lot of things going on in the United States where I think it's easy to kind of sit back and see Trump is in power. You're in a conservative area. These leftist ideologues, they're just rebranding all their stuff. They're doubling down, whether it's women in sports or men and women's sports or whatever it may be. They're doubling down on all their insane ideas. And it would be incredible if, like, I'll give you a practical example. Right now, our guys, some of whom are Southern Baptists, and we're trying to create kind of a not interdenominational, but just broadly Protestant Christian group in Colorado to be better equipped to provide the church a voice in politics in Colorado. And we're having to create something from scratch. Like, we don't have a template. There's organizations we're talking to that have an impact in other states. But how great would it be if the Southern Baptists were like, hey, we've done this. We have lawyers. We have people you can talk to. We have policy experts, and we can do this for you. That would be such a blessing. But instead, you get these institutionally crafted PR campaigns that are just trying to fleece church members' pockets so that they can have some kind of elite credibility in DC among the New York Times readership. And it's just gross. It's disgusting. And I'm hopeful that enough Southern Baptists see this. These people are very cunning, and they have lots of money. And so they are able to put out a lot of content that dupes just average churchgoers. And that makes me really angry and sad for churchgoers to be deceived on these matters with their own money being used against them. So
I could see how that would, that could really get under your skin that way too. I guess for me, maybe, and this is coming from the outside, like, I know for our denomination, we have a series of, like, it's not like quasi hierarchical, the churches are under the authority of classis is under the authority of synod. And in theory, each synod is supposed to be unique, but we're not congregation. We have a denominational head office. It has a budget. It has, there's staff members, and they basically carry on the business of the denomination between the meetings of synod. But my understanding as a congregational entity, there really isn't, per se, like denominational head offices in the Southern Baptist Convention, or am I maybe misunderstanding it? So, like, how do these organizations then relate to the churches if they're not, in a sense, I guess, established as part of a denominational office per se? Like, that for me kind of remains so funny. And maybe that's sort of the thing is that the relationship is not entirely clear, but maybe just walk through that a little bit.
Yeah, so the entities are essentially what you could call denominational offices, if you want to use that term. I mean, so the Southern Baptist Convention, some people say it only technically exists 2 days a year when we all gather. But so what we do is we have established something called the Executive Committee, which operates on behalf of the Southern Baptist Convention in its absence throughout the year, which that is a legal denominational entity. And it's really honestly kind of the deep state of the SBC. We elect an SBC president every year, and they can serve 2 consecutive terms, but we elect somebody. The executive committee picks its own CEO and president that serves in an untenured position, really running the Southern Baptist Convention year over year. And then along with the executive committee, we have all voted to create these other entities that are official Southern Baptist Convention entities: 6 seminaries, the IMB, the North American Mission Board, the ERLC, and Lifeway. I think and Guidestone, which manages, financial products and investments for SBC pastors. And so they are denominational entities. And then we're supposed to exercise control of them as a convention through the trustees. So we appoint trustees who get selected for us by other committees, a committee on committees, a committee on nominations. They present the trustees. And so then those trustees are supposed to hold the entities in trust on behalf of Southern Baptists and fulfill their sort of fiduciary duties to represent Southern Baptist interests. We know who those trustees are. You should be able to contact them, speak to them. But what's happened is the trustee system is really broken in the Southern Baptist Convention, and the trustees don't really serve the interests of the convention anymore. They act as cheerleaders for these denominational entities. They sort of circle the wagons and face outward, defending the entities from any and all criticism. One of the things, this is basic trustee theory 101. A trustee is supposed to be evaluating the performance of the chief executive officer, and rewarding or penalizing or redirecting them as appropriate. And so it's like, if your organization is failing, you don't reward your executive, your chief executive with increased compensation, right? But it's like that's what's happening in Southern Baptist Convention life. And so, the ERLC is an SBC entity. The trustees there refuse to manage it well on behalf of the SBC. So we need new trustees there. That's fundamentally how would we as Southern Baptists take control, redirect these entities? It would be through new presidents who appoint new trustees who actually do their job, if that clears things up.
So it seems like you have kind of, once you basically you elect the president, they have tremendous power to seed all of these organizations with their own people in that regard. That sort of perpetuates like an oligarchy of like an old boys network.
Well, yeah, there definitely is an old boys network, right? So we're like trying to change that system.
Well, because go ahead, Chase.
This is not unique necessarily to Southern
Baptist.
Baptist.
My denomination has the same thing, so that's why I understand it perfectly.
Yeah, it's common in any, not just ecclesial network, but any kind of, civil society or business or anything like that. But these entity heads and the people that get elected often have outside voices that will speak for them. And that's why someone like Russell Moore being the head of Christianity Today, or people like Ed Stetzer, who Lord knows what he does, they have massive influence in evangelicalism. And so then they can leverage their network to kind of like support them. And so there's just a lot of players that are not only in the SBC and in the elite, in kind of the deep state, but it's much broader than that, with many national connections. And so, it's Big Eva, and a lot of eyes are on the Southern Baptist Convention. Every year around this time, the New York Times is going to publish a hit piece on the Southern Baptist Convention, and that's going to give cover for more leftist ideologues to provide influence, and in some cases threaten bankruptcy over SBC institutions. And so it's much more, it's hard, and I'm sure you could speak to this, and you have, Cryptos, that there's both a something about it where it's like, some of the trustees need to be replaced, and this kind of good old boys network or whatever is in some sense, anyone who's more populist minded is going to look at it and say that's bad. But on the other hand, it's just kind of the way people naturally congregate and work together among friends. And so there's kind of a duality there. But as far as the current crop of who's in charge and who's influencing Southern Baptist churches, it's very bad, very we'll use a left word, very problematic, and it creates a lot of corruption at a lot of different entities.
Yeah, it seems like my perception from the outside is that a lot of these senior guys are dialed into the big managerial type churches where there's just, like I've listened to some of the podcasts of these guys, and they just have all of the lingo down. It's just like a patter that they can run through. They know how to talk to the congregants, to basically whisper in their ears the things that they want to hear, say the things they want to say, and then they sort of go do what they're going to do anyways. And there seems like there's a very much a disconnect in between sort of, the congregation whisperers who have that patter down pat, and they've even got the accent and everything. Like I've heard a few of these like they sound what you would think a Southern Baptist, leader would sound like. And it's like, I'm listening to thinking like, man, they've almost got me fooled. But I know better because I know the people who are calling them out and I know the kind of things they're doing. But it must be very frustrating to work at it from a ground level to try to break through and to sort of crack that the hold that the cabal has. And like you mentioned before, William, that there has been efforts before to rein in that liberal drift within the SBC, and it's had its ups and downs. But I suppose eventually, if you get yourself organized enough, that it can be done.
Well, yeah, I mean, and not to belabor this point, but I think that Southern Baptists every institution has to have people in charge. That's how it works. You can't have an infinite decentralized, rule. But the Southern Baptist Convention is very unique in the sense that there is the ability by the people to change to change those in charge, to change the president, to change the trustees, to take them back and reorder them. And so, yes, we have had a period of time where our leaders have demonstrably shifted away from stewarding these institutions on behalf of the people they're supposed to represent. This happens everywhere. And so thankfully we have a recourse to fixing that. Part of it does, I think, involve sort of changing the incentive structure. Right now, the incentive structure within the Southern Baptist Convention, the way you need to behave in order to matriculate through the system to get the positions of power and influence, rewards compromise and cowardice. But it's certainly possible to create an incentive structure that rewards courage and fidelity instead, that rewards holding these institutions in trust upon the behalf of the people they serve. And so things like voting to abolish the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission is something like that. If we can have a successful first vote on that, it tells those in charge, your time is up. We need new leadership. I mean, if we win that vote, any honest trustee would essentially resign, right? Like they would resign the positions, vacate the board. First, they'd fire the president, fire the staff, vacate the board, allow us to appoint a new board with a new mandate and a new mission, and appoint new leadership that's going to execute on that mission. It's actually not that difficult in the Southern Baptist Convention to know what we should be doing. We have a statement of faith. So abide by that and don't contradict it, which many of our entities are doing. So, so abide by our statement of faith and then look at how Southern Baptists has spoken to major issues through our resolutions process that we do year over year. So like last year, the Southern Baptists passed a resolution highlighting the moral evils and the ethical problems with IVF. And so Southern Baptists who want to speak to issues in the public square should look at that resolution. And if you are, aggressively promoting sort of the unlimited and unethical practice of certain forms of IVF, you might agree with it, but you're out of step with Southern Baptists, right? So it's actually not that hard. Like our confession of faith and our resolutions provide pretty clear guardrails for how our entities should be led. The only question is, will our leaders be faithful to that and be content to live within those boundaries? Or do they want to use these institutions as personal platforms to advance their own agenda? That's what's happening. And if that's what's happening, thankfully we do have a recourse to fix that.
So if I understand, yeah, and it, exactly, it really isn't that hard. If you want to speak on behalf of the Southern Baptist Convention, you should, it really isn't that hard to say, like, listen, you got to get on board and be in line with the fundamental teachings. But as you say, it's not really happening that way. Now, is the current president of the convention in his first or second term?
He is finishing his first term, and I think he'll be easily elected for a second term here in Dallas.
So who is that again?
Guy named Clint Presley. He's a pastor of Hickory Grove Baptist Church here outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. And, I think I definitely would have some disagreements with Clint. I know him personally to a degree as well, but he's much better than the last 3 presidents we had spanning a total of 6 years, including people like J.D. Greer. And so Clint supports these efforts to pass this law amendment and hold fast to male-only pastors. I think I will say this. there was a letter that had 10 former SBC presidents' signatures on it in support of the ERLC. Notably absent was Clint's signature. So he did not sign his name to the letter trying to help save the ERLC. I think he's moving the direction in moving the convention in a better direction.
That's right. I remember that because I listened to his speech at the last convention, sort of pitching for his thing, and I was not impressed. I wrote a thread on Twitter saying this is problematic. But anyway, so it's good to hear that he's been good. Do you remember that one, Jay? I don't know, but and he was like, "Who's this guy in my mentions?" Like, dogging on me. It's like. But yeah, so anyways, but it's good to hear that he's been better in that regard. So there really isn't, and I would imagine there's not any significant opposition coming to his second term then. So there won't be a real battle for the presidency this year.
Yeah, that's right. Not this year. I mean, I think this year we'll probably reelect Clint, no problem. And then next year in 2026 in Orlando, it'll be sort of an open election. And I'll say this, I think hopefully Clint continues to lead as he's led in his next year, helping move us back towards a position of better fidelity to our confession of faith and a more conservative posture in the public square as well. But I will want to see somebody in 2026 who's going to go even further, who's going to be even bolder, who's going to be even more aggressive, and more willing to rock the boat, if we want to use that phrase, to get us back on track.
Yeah, I know my denomination recently went through this because we're a little further down the road because when I was in seminary, women in office, in hindsight, we thought we were having a good faith discussion, but it turns out that we weren't. So people had said, the basic general framework of acknowledging male headship and male leadership, but with the proviso that, if God chooses to use a woman occasionally, he can do that, right? You see that in scripture and so forth. And we thought that occasionally actually meant very rarely and occasionally, but it turns out that this was not really a good faith discussion, and occasionally and rarely meant like we're going to build a super highway and just sort of start ramming the feminist agenda down through the throats of the church, where you end up then in 2024 with 30 churches basically having some measure of, affirming alphabetism. And thankfully our our synod last year took a stand and said these churches need to get in line with the confessions or they risk being turfed out of the denomination. And so these lines can be drawn even in a denomination like ours, which has, what do you say? It's centrist conservatism. It's, but it has drifted, but you can put the brakes on it. So it's good to hear that there is real efforts in the Southern Baptist Convention, because, if it starts to happen in the Southern Baptist Convention, then you can sort of, the It's Over boys will begin to have, start to play out. So it's nice to see that the fight is being engaged in that regard. And it's oftentimes, as you say, like it's not even people who are outwardly heretical. It's just people who are slippery and accommodating and often just managerial. And they just want to make things easy for themselves, as, that the sort of people kind of joke, the winsome approach.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the Southern Baptist Convention is beset by men who are content to manage over the steady decline of the convention and are unwilling to have the honest conversations about needed reforms to reshore up our foundations. I mean, really, with what the ERLC has been doing lately, imagine if a ship is sinking and rapidly taking on water, significant hull damage, and the people pointing it out are being, castigated as critics, while everybody else goes up on the bow and takes pictures of the beautiful scenery and says nothing to see here, right? Like, those are the kind of people we're dealing with. They want photo ops over real reform. Southern Baptists are kind of allergic to honest conversations about problems, and I don't know why that is. There's a lot we could get into there, but I think that
it's not unique to the Southern Baptist Convention. I think there's just that is, in terms of just general life in society, I think that is going to be, in the next 5 to 10 years, I think, a shock for a lot of people who've grown up, who are now in their 40s and 50s and older. that get ready for a lot of honest conversations that you really don't want to have, because people who are younger than you are desperate to have these conversations. Yeah. Well, I don't want to believe, I know both you guys are busy, and I'm really grateful that, that I know Josh had a hard commitment at 2, and I'm really grateful for both of you to be here. If people want to find you, William and Chase, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on X at William_E_Wolfe with an E. Follow the Center for Baptist Leaders at Baptist Leaders. Please go subscribe to our YouTube channel, Center for Baptist Leadership on YouTube. You can also find us on Facebook, Center for Baptist Leadership on Facebook, and that about covers it.
Yeah, and for you, Chase, because you have some stuff, not just your church or your account, but you have some other interests, like your political stuff in Colorado that's going on.
Yeah, so people can follow me on X at Chase Davis. Visit my website, jchasedavis.com. I podcast regularly. You've been a guest on there. So is William at Foolproof Theology. You can find that anywhere podcasts are found. It's on YouTube as well. Sermons available, boulderwell.org. And yeah, our coalition is Fight 1312. We're active on Twitter and on Facebook. And so you can follow us there and stay connected from afar with what we're doing in Colorado.
Very good. Again, thank you, gentlemen. And it's going to be interesting to pay attention to the Southern Baptist Convention in, 5 days. So looking forward to it. We'll talk to you guys later.
Thanks for having us.